Hi, everyone, it's Steve, and I am here with Robert West. Robert, thank you very much for joining us.
Great to be here.
Thank you. Let's start with a question. I'm calling you a freedom fighter, and I'd like to know, to what extent do you identify with yourself as a freedom fighter? Is that who you are?
I link that term more with military action than anything else. That's just my background. What I am is a citizen, the supreme authority in the United States, the king and queen that wanders the streets, and we hire public servants to take care of this thing we call government. I'm the owner operator of this country. I've been paying for it since I was 14 years old. I had a full-time job. I paid full-time taxes. I had to wait 4 years to be able to vote. I don't understand why we tax people who aren't able to vote. No taxation without representation. But we'll let people who have never had a job and have lived off of our sweat, we'll let them vote. Well, if no taxation without representation isn't fair, it doesn't seem fair that somebody would have representation and never a day in their life pay a tax. So that was sort of the kernel that I wasn't really happy with the system too much, but I went along and paid my taxes. I went and voted. I served in the military. I did everything I was supposed to do, but I noticed we had less and less and less freedom every year. And during the lockdowns, that was just the camel that broke the camel's back. So that's when I really got seriously got involved.
So, do you feel we're at a do or die situation, or is it for the sake of the country that you're doing this, or are there issues closer to home in your community and your state that have made you take this stand?
Well, it's a combination of things. My grandfather fought in World War I from the time he was 14 to the time he was 16. They found out how old he was and they kicked him out. But he fought in France for 2 years. My father fought in the Pacific in World War II. He was a duck boat driver. They expected 80% losses if they invaded Japan among that particular class of that function. I had an older brother off the coast of Korea. I had an older brother that got a Purple Heart during Vietnam. Myself and my little brother, we were in Gulf Storm 1. My son and my daughter are both military veterans. And it seems that every generation we come back to fewer and fewer and fewer freedoms. My grandfather went overseas to fight for freedom, came back to prohibition. My father went overseas to fight for freedom, came back, wanted to build a house, but had to get a permit first. He'd never heard of that before. What happened? My little brother wanted to build a house on that same property. Can't get a permit anymore. Have to get a contractor's license that costs $40,000 or hire a contractor. My son got out of the Marine Corps 2 months before the lockdowns. And at that point, we're just not going to go overseas and fight for freedom anymore. We're going to stay here and do it.
Where do you get your courage from and your determination? Are your family members the role models, or do you have additional sources as well?
I was an avid reader, a history buff, science fiction, fantasy, role-playing games. I've got a whole universe of heroes, and this country is full of heroes. I don't know anyone in the United States that doesn't know somebody who saved someone's life, who's not related or even distantly to a police officer, first responder, a military member. I see people that immigrate from overseas come to the United States, and they are in awe that regular people would step up, run into a burning building to save a kid, or dive into a lake to save someone who's drowning that they didn't know. For us, it's just what we do. For them, and I've been told this by a person, it's like living in a country of superheroes, but incredibly humble superheroes that don't see themselves that way.
So your daily life as an American is what inspires you.
Absolutely. In my history, my family's history, this experiment, through all of human history, we are the exception. When we say American exceptionalism, I'm not talking about anything else other than we are the exception to history. There's never been a government before that was instituted with the sole purpose of the people being able to control it and limiting its abilities and its power. And that's going away because we as owner operators have ceded that role.
Do you find many people like you, or do you consider yourself to be the exception in the sense of not just being willing to help a neighbor, but take a leadership position?
Uh, I think we have gotten the humble part down so well that no one thinks they're qualified to do anything. I'll go talk to a group of patriots, and maybe there's 150 people in the room. And I said, show of hands, how many people are qualified to be a congressman? Well, they're all of age. They're all U.S. citizens. They've all been a resident of their state for the required period of time, and hardly any hands go up. And then I go through the requirements for being a congressman. I said, okay, raise your hand if you're, this age, raise your hand. And every hand in the room is up. Okay, you're all qualified to be congressmen. I've met some of these congressmen. Some of them are dumb as a box of rocks. It doesn't take much, but we've specialized. Oh, I'm a doctor. I can't be a congressman. Oh, I sell shoes. I can't be a congressman. Of course you can. You've had a job, you've paid taxes, you've raised a family. A lot of these people in Congress have never held a job, ever, in the real world. What are they qualified to do?
I get that. And you're attributing this to American humility, or is it
I
something
think a lot
else?
of it, yeah, I think a lot of it is humility. We don't think of ourselves as anything special. I noticed that you've got a bookshelf on the back wall there, a couple of them, right? Out of 100 people, how many people have read as many books as you? And you think about that, but you're exceptional in that regard.
Well, I appreciate that. It's not due to humility. It's not humility that keeps people from learning. I think people get stuck. I think that in a certain sense, we become a little bit too comfortable. Um, would you agree with that?
I would agree that the comfort breeds complacency, but seriously, if you look at the average household in America, uh, look that up. How many books are in the average house in America? And it's in the single digits. I can't imagine that. I can't imagine going a year without reading more books than that. How would you ever expand your mind? And people come to me all the time and say, what can I do as a citizen? And that's why I wrote my first book, The 5-Star Plan. It was the answer to that question. And here's the list of things you can do as a citizen. And really, you can do more than the elected. The elected are under constraints. They have finance reporting, they have campaign rules, they have to watch what they say or they won't get reelected. We don't have those constraints. So we actually are more powerful than the elected.
Do you think it's a factor that the bureaucracy has become so big that people feel there's really no room for me? There's somebody taking care of every part of our lives or trying to. Do you find that people feel like, well, if I did decide to get involved, I wouldn't even know where to go? Are people
Yeah,
directionless?
they look at it like a David and Goliath kind of thing, right? When we started this country, each congressman had 30,000 constituents. And today, 600, 700,000. We have 2 House of Lords. We no longer have a House of Commons. And what's one vote worth? Well, if it used to be that 30,000 people elected and now that 600,000 people elected, well, your vote, your inflation, not only is your dollar become worth less and less and less, your votes become less and less and less valuable to the point that they're just statistics. So what's one vote mean? And it's really hard to tell people that one vote might not matter in a lot of elections, but sometimes they do. I was the one vote that decided who was going to be justice of the peace for a county for 4 years. I was precinct chair, and our candidate passed away between the primary and the general. Well, it's the job of the precinct chairs in the district to replace the candidate on the ballot if they become ineligible. And there was 5 of us, 2 votes for one person, 2 votes for another person. I was a tie-breaking vote. So I was that one individual vote that a person in office for 4 years for an entire county. And it does happen, but you have to be able to step up and be involved and fill those roles. And then again, back to the precinct chair thing, the reason that's so important is we still have the same number of voters for a precinct committee person as we did at the founding. We just create more precincts. So now we have like 400,000 precincts, and we have like 400,000 precinct chairs. So they still can represent their neighborhood. Congress would have to have 11,000 members to get back to 30,000 constituents per. That's not going to happen. It's overwhelming. It's not going to happen. But your precinct chairs can start seizing back the power that has eroded over the years. The party does not like the people having a power. They want to have the power. The elected don't want people having power. They want to have it. The courts are grabbing more of it. Everybody's trying to grab more. And our founders saw this. They knew this was a tendency for government. That's why in his farewell address, George Washington warned about political parties. He said, you'll have foreign influence, you'll have money problems, just getting more and more important. Whoever spends the most is going to win when you go to this party system, and riots and insurrections. So besides being a great statesman, he's an unacknowledged prophet. And if you read through his writings, he saw things that nobody else saw. For example, if the Bible ever ceases to become the primary instrument of education, chaos and violence will stalk the halls of our schools. How far before anybody ever even thought about a school shooting did he say these things? But now looking back going, wow, that guy had a crystal ball. So these things, they alter the and when I say they, I mean the people fighting against this country and its founding and its principles. They tend to change the language, they change the nature of the debate, they misdirect more and more. They gaslight to the point where they say stuff and you think, well, am I the crazy person here? Because I know that's not true. That's not even close to the truth. And it doesn't stop them when you call them on it. They just look at you weird. For example, how many elected officials do we have right now saying a woman is anybody who says a woman? Well, that's patently stupid. I mean, it's just like ridiculous. Who would have ever dreamed that that would have been a statement coming out of an adult's mouth, let alone somebody who's a member of Congress? So more and more and more, they just go so far off into left field that you forget to argue basic economics. You forget to argue the Constitution. And a lot of times they're honest. No, we don't care about the Constitution. That's a 200 and something year old document. I don't care about it. Okay. Or can we have an atheist in office? Well, yeah, of course we can. Okay. But if you don't believe in God, how can you possibly believe in God-given rights? There's no way. You can't believe in the gift without the giver. And if they're atheist, well, then man gave us these rights and man can take them back. So it sounds weird, but you go out there and you tell a church only to vote for people who believe in God, and you'll never be invited back. The churches have kept silent in return for the tax breaks. Well, I'm sorry, if God tells you to say something, you say it. And if they take your tax breaks away, well, render unto Caesar what Caesar, render unto God. I render obedience to God. When the shutdowns happen, how many pastors locked their doors? Vast majority. I talked to one pastor, he opened his doors. Church is 7 days a week. If your church is closed, our church is open. When the sheriffs showed up, he said, go ahead and arrest me. I've got 200 members where we've got a list. And if you arrest me, the next one on the list gets up there and starts reading from the Bible. And while you're arresting one of us, the other 200 will be filming it on their phones. So I hope you brought lots of zip ties. And they said, well, we can lock the doors. And he goes, I can take it off the hinges. Well, we can weld it shut, because then I can back my truck through any of these four walls. The church stays open. That was at the very beginning of the lockdowns. They never went back to that church and bothered him again. That's all it takes, is enough people to stand up and say no.
Tell me about your relationship with God. Obviously, we're fighting for God-given rights. Does God play a major role, a minor role? Is he your partner? How do you relate to God in this work?
God gave us everything. And there's no way that this could, what I'm doing, there's no way it could have flourished the way it had unless God had blessed it. We can plant seeds, only God can make them sprout. So when I started, I traded dollars for hours like most people. I was broke. I was, working hourly. I've got a wife, I've got a family. And when the lockdowns happened, I started this mission. And I said, what can I do? I can write a book. I've never written a book before. That's kind of scary. And when I say kind of scary, I'm the guy that got shot at by a tank, okay? But I kind of envisioned myself writing refund checks late into the night, like Steve Martin in The Jerk, It's like, you wrote this garbage, give me my money back. Nobody's asked for their money back yet. So I think I did pretty good. But so I wrote this book and I told people what they could do and where the problems were. But a lot of people have no idea what their rights are. They've never read the Constitution. They've never been taught the Constitution. I talked to a group of attorneys who told me it is possible to graduate high school, graduate college, graduate political science, graduate law school, and never have actually seen the text of the Constitution. And bystanders are like, no, that's ridiculous. You couldn't possibly have a law degree without looking at the text of the Constitution. They're like, we don't care about the text of the Constitution. We care about the precedents that's been set. You can memorize the Constitution. That doesn't help you in a court of law. If the courts have ruled a certain way all this time, you come up there with black and white, this is wrong. And they're like, well, where's your precedent? Where's your rulings at? Well, this is the Constitution. Sorry. That doesn't count. So it is amazing that our inheritance, our constitutional rights, can be taken away. And they haven't even bothered to look at the inventory. They haven't bothered to read them. So they don't even know when they disappeared. And a lot of people, we shutdowns in Texas. A lot of people don't know this, but the Texas Bill of Rights says the public beaches cannot be closed for any reason. You can't block egress out of or ingress to public beaches. I don't know why that was so important when we wrote that Constitution, but it's one of our enumerated rights. And they shut down the beaches. We have the freedom of religion, not only at the federal level, but at the state level, and they shut down the churches. The courts are supposed to be open no matter what. They did not maintain the courts. A lot of the courts were closed during COVID. And on and on and on. Public gatherings were outlawed without express written permission from the county judges. You can't outlaw public gatherings. So we went right down the list and we identified about 17 violations of the state constitution, including just ignoring the separation of powers, which is still being ignored. 3 years in, Greg Abbott still has his temporary emergency powers from COVID, and he can write whatever law, decree, whatever he wants, and it's the law. And in some cases, he was calling up judges who were trying to enforce the law he wrote. Go, no, that's not what I meant. I meant this. So not only is he the executive and he's the legislative, but now he's the judicial. Well, just give him a crown. Why do we have the rest of the government? And most people are fine with it because he got reelected.
You mentioned that obviously our rights and freedoms are divine in origin. Do you think that the Constitution is a divinely inspired document?
It would have to be. If you look through the history of the United States and how that document came about, probably the least religious founder was Benjamin Franklin. And at one point, there was an impasse. And he said, you know, we defeated the most powerful military on earth because every day we prayed for help. We prayed for divine intervention. And it worked. When was the last time we just held a day of prayer for this function? And when they shut it all down and they held a day of prayer and came back, things went much smoother. And you'll notice as we turn away from God, we get punished. And as we turn back to God, we get rewarded. You can just track this. It's almost a one for one. I talk to people all the time, and they're like, "Why do you support Israel?" I support Israel because God tells me to. If I bless Israel, I'll be blessed. If I curse Israel, I'll be cursed. History bears this out. When was the last time someone cursed Israel, didn't pay a price? Where are these people at? You know, where are the Babylonians? Where are the Nazis? Where's the Soviet Union? All these things are gone. And why? Well, you got on the wrong side of God, and poof, you're gone. America has done so much. We've fed people who couldn't even afford to pay for the food. We've shipped shiploads and shiploads of food all around the world. I don't know. There's not an emergency, a disaster that we haven't helped out, and it's just something that we do as Americans. We expect to do it. The rest of the world doesn't have that mindset.
Let's suppose you were speaking in front of an audience of 300 students, and a few of them, you open their eyes, and they said, you know, you made me realize that I have a heritage that I've taken for granted, and that it's like my grandfather leaving me a bucket load of money, and I haven't even bothered to set up an account to use it. So what would you suggest as being the first place for a 25-year-old to get started, to start appreciating this heritage that we're describing?
I would absolutely encourage everybody to read not only their federal constitution, but their state constitution. If you get this inheritance and you don't do an inventory, you'll never know when it's stolen from you if you're getting your entire inventory. And if they take away your freedoms and they take away your inheritance, you'll never be able to pass it to your kids. You don't even know it's gone. So that is striking. One of the parts of the Texas Constitution, and it is, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy to force them to read this thing. It is a huge document. But the first part is the Bill of Rights. That's fairly easy. Section 2 is only a paragraph. It's a separation of powers. Section 3, oh, it's long. But if you go down to skip down to about line 157, it says, in the event of an invasion and the governor or lieutenant governor fall in combat, the legislature can appoint their replacements in any way they deem fit until the invasion is repelled, at which time we'll have elections. Provided. It's a very strong legal word. Provided. Everything came before this, ignore it unless you do this. Provided that no part of Section 1 is altered, abolished, or even temporarily suspended. In other words, you can be in the Capitol building of Texas, and there's an invasion, and blood is coming in literally under the door, and you still cannot violate the rights of the citizens. That's the only reason you exist. And they ignore it.
Last question. Talking about the same student and who decided to appreciate his heritage. He's agreed to read the documents you described. He has the same now fervor as you do. We've got to do something here. But he says, I'm scared. I've never taken a position like this. I'm on Facebook. Everybody's going to unfriend me. I've got a lot of friends. They're going to censor me. My parents might even turn their back. I'm afraid. What words would you say to him to get him to take a step forward nonetheless?
Well, the Bible tells us 365 times not to be afraid. So there is nothing to be afraid of. This life is temporary. It's going to go away. There's no getting off of this ride. Okay. Compared to death, what are you scared of? Losing everything? Okay. As long as you're alive, you can get it back. And if you're dead, you don't need it. So there is no reason to be afraid. If people turn their back on you because you are trying to honor the people that fell in combat and gave their lives for this nation, then you don't want to be around those people anyway. And as a veteran, I dedicated my second book to 3 people who died that I personally knew in the military. 2 of them in training accidents, 1 of them over Iraq. And often I'll tell people Memorial Day for a lot of people is to go out and get drunk and ride around on the boat and have a good time. Memorial Day to me is to take an inventory of what I've done so those lives weren't just wasted. What have I done to make the country better? Those people gave everything. Well, I can be a little uncomfortable. I can lose a friend. Oh my God, my number on Facebook is going to go down. 2 of those people that I dedicated this book to, I literally went to the crash site with the team, and they gave us 2 bags. This bag is for body parts, and this bag is for airplane parts. And at one point, I called up and I said, I need a set of tools. And they said, no, you don't need any tools. And I said, yes, I need a set of tools. And we weren't supposed to say over the air whether anybody died in this crash or not. That hadn't been released yet. And we went back and forth. And the guy, and I said, listen, I need a set of tools right now because I've got something here. Without a set of tools, I don't know which bag to put it in.
Mm.
So when you've been to these places and you've literally, not figuratively, you've literally picked up the pieces, it'll give you a greater appreciation of what these people sacrificed. The gentleman that died over Iraq, he was an only child. His family line is done. There's nobody to carry on his name. So people don't realize how much is been given for what they take for granted. Our 3/4 of the country can't name the 3 branches of government. And if you can't name the 3 branches of government, you don't know what makes us different from other governments. So how can one be better than the other? You know, I can hold up 2 keys. Hey, I got 2 free cars. Left, right, what difference does it make? But if I say this is a Chevy and this is a Ford, then everybody in the room's got a strong opinion about which key they want. So that's something civics has to be taught, and it has to be pounded in that this is the process and this is how it works and this is why it works this way. The whole idea that we're going to get rid of the electoral college and everything's going to be hunky-dory, or we're going to get rid of the Supreme Court, or we're going to pack the court, or we're going to get rid of the Senate. These people have no idea about the 3 branches of government, and they're going to try to redo the Constitution. Well, I'm a pretty smart guy, comparatively speaking, right? I've sat down and tried to write a Constitution. It's not that easy. So these people that they can't even bother to be registered to vote or show up and vote. They want a voice in changing this nation. I mean, you're not involved. You don't get a vote because you decided not to vote. And we have them on both sides. I've worked with people that said they'd fight to the death to defend our power, grab a gun and blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, who are you voting for this election? Oh, I'm not registered to vote. But you can't be bothered to vote, and I'm expected to trust you in combat. It is incumbent upon all of us to look at ourselves as owner-operators. We've left the people in government alone for so long that the cash register is empty, the shelves are bare. And are we shocked? Any business would be like that if you left the employees run it for 40, 50 years. Surprising that and sometimes they don't even let you through the door. They don't even recognize you're the owner anymore.
It's a very good metaphor. Last question. You're mentioning about how your forebears inspired you. How do you want your grandchildren and their children to remember you? What do you want them to know about you?
I want them to know that I did what I could do to make it better. If it all comes apart, I was the guy that was at least trying. I was bailing some water instead of just, screaming at the top of my lungs or trying to grab everything I could before it went down. If we succeed, I want them to know that I was one of those people that helped and that they have a responsibility to pass this country on in better shape than when they received it. And I'm ahead of the curve there. My son is already 100% in agreement with me and probably more conservative than I am. He's a much better man than I was at his age. It's not easy for anyone to say, as much as we say we want that, when it happens, it's sort of it's a little bit of a shock. So it is, I'm ahead of the game on that one. At least I'm not in that conflict of the next generation doesn't care about these things and I haven't been able to instill it. But before both of my children went in the military, before they went in the military, I made them read the Constitution again. And they'd already had a firm reading. I remember my 14-year-old daughter, the first time she read the Constitution, she had this look of awe in her eyes. She said, "This is the most brilliant document for running a government anybody," and this is the first time she read it, "that anybody could possibly have." And my chest started just swelling with pride. And she goes, "When did we stop using it?" Completely innocent. But she knew this didn't match with what reality was. And you talk about just crushing. It's like, well, I don't know exactly when it stopped being used, but obviously they're not paying attention to it.
Well, I wish you much strength and many blessings in your continued work. It's a supreme honor to know you, and I feel privileged. I've heard your story, and I want to thank you for taking the time to tell it. And I can guarantee you that there were many people listening to this and watching this that will be similarly inspired. Thank you very much, Mr. Robert West.
Thank you, sir.